The leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S649, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 32, S649, a bill to ensure that all individuals who should be prohibited from buying a firearm are listed in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System and require a background check for every firearm sale and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 11 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, thank you. We are on the verge of a historic vote that will determine whether we make America safer and assure that we do everything possible as senators and citizens to assure there are no more new towns. On the evening of December 14, when we left the firehouse at Sandy Hook, there was a vigil at a church in Newtown, St. Rose of Lima, presided over by Father Bob, who is Monsignor Robert Weiss, a very moving and powerful experience. The church was filled. People stood at the windows to hear what was going on. The governor spoke, and so did I. And I said that evening, the world is watching Newtown. And in fact, the world was watching Newtown, as we knew from the horror of that afternoon when many of us arrived at the church and first at the firehouse, to see families emerging and learning for the first time that their children, their babies, would not be coming home that evening. It was an experience that will stay with me forever. The sights and sounds of that afternoon, filled with grief and pain, will never leave me. The world was watching Newtown that day and that evening, and has watched Newtown and Connecticut in the days and months since, and I have been privileged to spend many hours and days, weeks, and these past months with the families. The world has watched the families, and it has seen in them and in Newtown, a great community, a quintessential New England town, the strength and courage that was as unimaginable as the horror of that day. Strength and courage that represents what is good about America and what is strong and courageous about our nation. The world has watched Newtown and the families of Newtown, and it has watched Connecticut. And now the world is watching the United States Senate. It is watching the Senate to see whether democracy works. Sounds simple, but it's true. Will democracy work to reflect the majority of the United States of America, the majority of our people who say we need to do something about the guns? That is what the families said to me that day and in days since, and what people in Connecticut and across the country have said to their senators. We must do something about gun violence. I remember talking to one of the families that evening and saying, you know, when you're ready, we ought to talk about what we can do to stop gun violence in measures in the United States Congress. And she said to me, I'm ready now. The United States Senate must be ready now to act. It must keep faith with those families and victims as the world watches, with Benjamin Andrew Wheeler, age 6, his father, David, is here today, and he is here in spirit as we decide in the United States Senate today whether we will move forward toward progress. Anna Grace Marquez Green, also age 6. Her mother, Nelba, is here today, and she is with us in spirit. Dylan Hockley, age 6, whose mother, Nicole, is here, also here in spirit. And Jesse Lewis, age 6. His father, Neil Heslin, is here. Mary Sherlock, one of the 6 educators killed at Sandy Hook Elementary, whose husband, Bill, is here. Jesse, Mary are here with us, too. And we know that compromise and action are possible because 2 of our colleagues have forged a bipartisan compromise that will enable us to come closer. It is imperfect. It is less than what I would have preferred in achieving universal background checks. It is a starting point. It is a step in the right direction. And it will help us achieve a larger bipartisan compromise because background checks are only one part of a comprehensive strategy that must include a ban on illegal trafficking, strengthening school safety, as well as mental health initiatives, and a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And I will be privileged to spearhead that effort on high-capacity magazines, hopefully next week after today's vote, along with colleagues such as Dianne Feinstein and my colleague, Chris Murphy. Today, let us decide, as the world watches, there will be no more Newtowns. That is what the families want. That is what America wants. Let us resolve that we will make democracy work as we go beyond this first step and decide to proceed on a bill that also is imperfect but provides a starting point, provides a way forward so that we can make our communities safer. The families of Newtown have performed an extraordinary service to our nation. Not only has the world watched and been inspired by their strength and courage, but they have turned the tide. They have visited with our colleagues, and they have impacted this process more profoundly and more directly than any other single group. They have shown that we can break the stranglehold of special interests and the NRA, that speaking truth to power still works. And to them, we owe a special thanks. To them, as a nation, we owe a debt of gratitude for the lives that will be saved, for the futures that will be given, even if their children and their loved ones will not enjoy that future. They have given futures to countless Americans who will be saved from the scourge of gun violence. And so to them, I say thank you. They are in this building, and their children, their loved ones, are with us today in spirit as we take this historic step. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to be on the floor this morning to begin today's debate on this historic gun violence measure with my colleague, Senator Blumenthal. And I join with him in my awe of the Newtown families who are here this week. People have watched them on the news as they have gone from office to office and told the story of their loved ones. Nobody can paint a picture as to why we need to act next week better than the families of those people who lost their lives in Newtown. And there's so many stories that they can tell better than anyone else. They can tell the story of their lost first graders, but they can also tell the story of the 5 little boys and girls who escaped that morning, who escaped when the shooter went to reload, and there was a brief period of time where some kids could run out of one of those first grade classrooms. And better than anyone else, these families can posit as to whether their little boys and girls would still be alive today if the shooter walked in with 10-round clips rather than 30-round clips, if he had to exchange magazines 15 times rather than 5 or 6 times. Nobody can tell that story better than these families. What I've tried to do over the course of the last couple days is to help these families tell the story of their loved ones, but to also paint a broader picture, to talk about the 30 lives every day that are ended by gun violence. I think we need to talk about the victims and allow for the voices of these victims to be part of the debate here. Because, well, the tragedy in Newtown has gotten the headlines and the highlights and is certainly the reason why we're standing here today. More people than were killed in Newtown die every day in this country from gun violence on the streets of Washington and Hartford and Bridgeport and Baltimore, all across the country. So these victims need to be our imperative, whether they be the 6- and 7-year-old kids or the teachers in Newtown, or whether they be the 25-year-olds and 17-year-olds that are dying every single day across our country. It's just got to end. The answer can't be, as it has for 20 years, that we're going to do nothing here. And so I want to take a few minutes to continue telling these stories this morning. And I want to begin with Dylan Hockley. Dylan's mother has probably been one of the most articulate spokesmen for this cause. His parents, Nicole and Ian, have just been amazing in their ability to grieve and also come down to Washington and argue their cause. Dylan loved video games. He loved jumping on trampolines. He loved watching movies. He was autistic, but he was doing so much better. He was so proud of the fact that he had learned how to read, and he was taking out books every day from the library to bring home. His parents chose Sandy Hook Elementary School because of its great autism program, and I spoke yesterday about his paraprofessional, his special education aide, who was so wonderful to assist him in doing better every single day. Because of his autism, he was a child who loved routine and repetition, and there were a few movies that he'd just watch over and over and over again. Up, Wall-E, The Gruffalo, and he'd find these portions of the movie that he loved so much that he'd sit in front of the TV with his headphones on, just rewinding those portions over and over and over again. And every single time he watched those movies, he'd laugh over and over and over again. His parents have created an organization called Dylan's Wings of Change. It's a memorial fund to benefit autism. And it's just one of a multitude of efforts that have flowed forth from this tragedy. Dylan's life was ended, but this fund is going to help make sure that other kids like him have the chance to lead great normal lives, even though they deal with complex problems like autism.
For question?
Be happy to.
Mr. President, let me say that I want to commend the Senator from Connecticut, Senator Murphy, as well as Senator Blumenthal. In the last 2 days, they have come to the floor many, many times, leading the floor debate and discussion on the pending legislation, which we'll vote on soon, relative to guns and gun safety. It is appropriate that they are here because, being the senators representing Newtown, Connecticut, they have a personal attachment to the families that have weathered this tragedy. This morning, I met with those families in my office. Tears were shed, as you might expect. These families have lost little children like Dylan and so many others, and it is a loss which they will feel for a lifetime. But in their grief, they have come forward and shown extraordinary courage to walk through the corridors of power in Washington to bring a simple message that they don't want this to happen to any other parent. And I want to thank Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal for reminding us that we have the power. We've been given the power by the people we represent to make this a safer nation for families, for children, for schools, for communities, across the board. And soon we'll have a vote. And we're hoping, and I think that is a positive hope, that enough on the other side of the aisle will step forward to defy the filibuster that has been threatened and bring this matter to the floor for a vote. And I know that Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal have come to the floor for the last day and a half and more to dramatize that issue. What I found interesting, and I'd like to ask the senator from Connecticut to comment on, is the promise of this community. They gave me a list of things and said this goes beyond guns and gun safety. And I would ask the senator, if he could, to address this promise that came out of Newtown, Connecticut after the terrible tragedy on December 14th.
Well, I thank the senator and thank you for your career of fighting on behalf of legislation that will address gun violence, and the summation of all of that work hopefully will be with us this week and next week. Thank you for your question about the Sandy Hook Promise. Sandy Hook Promise, which has been signed by tens of thousands of people all across the country, came out of this tragedy because there was a recognition, as you said, that this was not a sprint, that this was a marathon, that the promise that we needed to make to each other in the wake of this horrific tragedy was not just that we were going to do everything within our power, our individual powers, to try to reduce the incidence of gun violence. And as you point out, Senator Durbin, we have more power, the 100 of us, than almost anyone else, and shame on us if we don't use it. But the Sandy Hook Promise was that there are so many other things that you can do, that you can make smaller commitments in your communities to build better and bigger systems of mental health, that you can try to forge atmospheres in schools that are more inviting, that are more positive, that you can frankly just be nicer to your neighbors, that you can be more thoughtful in your everyday interactions, knowing that there could be some tragedy around the corner that takes your neighbor away from you. Make sure that you say everything that you want to say to that person. And so this promise, a promise to do everything within our power to try to make sure that this never happens again, but to bring a new level of positivity to our world in the wake of this awful violence is one of the most important things that comes from it. And, we're so grateful that these families are here, not just challenging us to pass specific pieces of legislation, but also, Senator, to make our lives change in the wake of this.
I'd like to ask if you'd yield further for a question through the chair. One of the issues you just raised is one that I'd like to have you expound on, and that is the issue of mental illness and mental health. I think this is something that in my lifetime we have seen dramatic progress made, not just in the treatment of mental illness, but in our attitude toward mental illness. There was a time in the history of this country and this world when mental illness was viewed not as an illness, but a curse. And the people who were afflicted by it were often shunned and institutionalized and treated very badly because it was considered to be something incurable, and they had somehow been cursed, and that was their plight on earth. Thank goodness that has changed, and we now have a more positive attitude toward dealing with mental illness. I might say I've read, and I believe it's accurate, more than half the people in America suffer from some form of depression. It is very common in most families, and it is treatable. Most mental illnesses are treatable, And most victims of mental health illness are people who are peaceful, God-fearing, loving people who need understanding and help. They are no threat to anyone. More often, they are the victims of violence rather than the perpetrators of violence. One person in your community of Newtown who stepped up and clearly was unstable and used those firearms on December 14th to kill innocent people has caused us to step back and take a look at the issue of mental illness as it relates to guns and firearms. And I think what we're trying to do in this legislation is to say, if your mental illness has reached such an extreme, if you are so unstable or threatening that you need to be watched in terms of purchases of firearms, let's make sure the records are there. But I hope, and I know you agree with this, I hope that we will not allow this discussion to take us away from the beginning part, that treating mental illness, helping people is the right thing to do, not shunning them, not pushing them aside from the rest of mainstream, but understanding that treatment of mental illness makes us a better people, gives them a better chance in life. It's that small minority of those suffering from these afflictions who need to be monitored in terms of the use and purchase of firearms. I ask the Senator.
No, I thank the Senator for that comment. And as he knows, there's absolutely nothing inherent in mental illness that creates a connection to violence. As you said very correctly, people with mental illness are much more likely to be the victims of violence than to perpetrate a crime. And, the great irony coming out of this debate could be that if we make the awful mistake of equating violence with mental illness, then we will frankly make it harder for people to go out and seek treatment, not easier. Adam Lanza was a deeply disturbed individual. His mother made awful mistakes, but she was certainly trying to figure out a way to get him help. The fact is that there are far too many families out there who don't have places to turn for treatment. And that's the right thing to do, independent of this debate today. We should absolutely be talking about the comprehensive commitment to ending gun violence, but the reality is that today there are just way too many families who hit brick walls when trying to find mental health treatment for their children. And if we were to go through this debate and somehow stereotype people with mental illness as prone to violence, then it will frankly create more barriers. There's a proposal out there from one of the gun lobby groups to create a registry of everyone with mental illness across this country. It's an absolute ludicrous idea, especially when this very same group opposes keeping a registry of everyone with guns in this country. I take the Senator's concern to heart here. This is a very serious incident in Newtown, but it shouldn't cause us to take steps backwards in terms of the supports we give families who are looking for help for their loved ones.
The last point I would like to make is that included in the bill that comes before us is not only an opportunity to change some of the circumstances that might have saved lives in Newtown, but also addresses some underlying issues of gun violence that are not resulting in a mass killing, but the killing on a day-to-day basis of innocent people. A measure which I've joined Senator Leahy, Senator Kirk, and Senator Collins in introducing relates to straw purchases. These are purchases by some individual who does not have a problem in their background that would disqualify them from buying a gun. And they buy a gun and then turn it over to someone who has a problem. This straw purchase or third-party purchase happens way too often. In the city of Chicago, where we are making progress toward reducing gun violence and murder, in a recent survey of the crime guns confiscated in the last 10 years, 9% of them in the city of Chicago came from the state of Mississippi. Now, the state of Mississippi is not contiguous to Illinois. It's a long way away. But clearly someone had started an industry of buying guns easily in Mississippi and moving them up the interstate system all the way to Chicago and selling them to the gangbangers and the thugs and the criminal elements in the city. Another 20% of the guns came from one gun shop outside the city of Chicago in the suburbs. We know exactly where it is. It's in Riverdale, Illinois. And that has become the venue of choice for girlfriends to go buy a gun for their boyfriend who's going to use it to kill somebody. Well, the provision in the law that we're going to try to bring to the floor, the base bill, says this will now be a stiff federal crime, a hard-time federal crime. To buy a gun, which you knew or should have known, was going to be used in the commission of a crime. And so though it doesn't directly affect the circumstances of the tragedy at Newtown, it really does hold out a promise to reduce some of the other deaths. Yesterday you gave us a chart that showed how many had died from gun violence since December 14th in Newtown. And it was a big chart with a lot of faces on it of people who had died. So I thank you for what you've done in terms of what has affected Newtown, but I also thank you for supporting this underlying legislation. I think this chart is now being shown here, and I hope that we keep in mind that gun safety and reducing gun violence means start with the massacres, the tragedies that have stricken us, but also go beyond that and find a way to make the streets safer for Hydea Pendleton, a high school girl who came out for the inauguration from Chicago, couldn't have had a happier day, then 10 days later was gunned down in a park next to her school in the city. So we want to make this a comprehensive and balanced approach, common sense approach to gun safety, and I thank the senator from Connecticut for that.
Thank you very much. Thank the Majority Whip. And just add to his last comment, my constituents are amazed that we don't have a federal law banning gun trafficking today. They're amazed that if you go into a store and buy guns legally and then walk outside that store and sell them to people that are prohibited, that you haven't committed a federal crime. There's just an assumption that the federal government would disallow that. We haven't, but hopefully at the end of this debate we will, and I thank Senator Durbin for all of his fantastic work on that issue. Mr. President, let me tell a few more stories here, and I want to get to Senator Durbin's point and tell some stories about the victims of urban gun violence as well. But let me tell you just one more story from Newtown, and that's the story of our heroic principal. Dawn Hochsprung was the principal at Sandy Hook Elementary School. People have heard a lot about her because she was perhaps the first to die that day, because when the bullets started flying, when she heard the gunman enter through the front door, she ran straight to him. Some of the investigators have posited, given the way the crime scene shook out, that she may have even lunged for the gunman to try to stop him before he turned the corner to the first grade classrooms, and she was unsuccessful. She was killed, excuse me, perhaps the first that day. The irony surrounding this day is multifold, but part of it involves the fact that one of her most recent proudest accomplishments as principal of that school was the establishment and integration of a brand new security system, one that made sure that every visitor who entered that school after 9:30 had to buzz in, had to talk to the security people, the front desk people, before they entered the school. That doesn't work too well when the person trying to gain entry doesn't need to press the buzzer, instead can take an AR-15, which sprays 6 bullets a second, and just knock out all the windows. She was a passionate educator. She dove into her work at Sandy Hook. She was one of those folks who didn't sit in her office. She was out amongst the hallways at all times trying to make that place a much more positive environment. She grew up in Connecticut. She lived in Woodbury, Connecticut, with her husband and her 2 daughters and her 3 stepdaughters. She grew up loving the outdoors. Her friends recalled that Dawn Lafferty, at the time, was a tomboy who loved sports in high school. And she wasn't a just top level athlete, but that didn't stop her. One of the most amazing stories that I've heard about Dawn was when she was in school at Naugatuck High School. She wanted to run with the boys' track team. She wanted to run sprints, and she wasn't allowed to do that. And she protested to the coach and to the administration, and they still said that she couldn't run sprints with the boys' track team. And so she took her case to the school board. This is a high school student. took her case to the school board, and she won her case. And then she came back to her high school, and she didn't just run sprints with the boys. She then recruited other girls to run sprints along with her. This was a born leader. And, I guess maybe we take some solace in the fact that, well, so many of these other kids here, whether it be Dylan or Chase or Benjamin or Jesse or Anna, they were leaders too. They were going to do amazing things with their lives. At least we got to know with Dawn what her true potential was. And we saw that potential in the wonderful school that she had built. I just talked about Dylan. Dylan's parents came from England, came all the way to Sandy Hook, Connecticut, for this school because of the programs that Dawn had built there. And if they ever had any doubt as to whether they had chosen the right leader, well, they were confident of that when she ran to the gunman to try to stop the carnage from getting any worse. Let me tell you about one more little girl, age 6, Madeline Sue. Madeline was, again, one of the youngest victims that day. She was, a shy and relatively quiet 6-year-old, but there were certain things that would make her light up. A lot of these kids loved animals, and Madeline loved dogs. She lit up around dogs. It was her passion. She was an avid reader, and she loved running, and she loved dancing, and she, more than anything else, loved to wear bright, flowery dresses. It matched her personality. She shared a bed with 2 of her sisters. They had their own rooms, but they loved each other so much that they chose to sleep together at night, and they're going to miss her dearly. But, Mr. President, as Senator Durbin pointed out, 20 kids and 6 adults were killed in Newtown that day, 2 others in Adam and Nancy Lanza, 28 total. That's less than the average number of people who are killed by gun violence all across this country every day. And we deserve to talk about them as well. And so before I leave the floor today, I want to just tell you about a couple of the most recent victims of gun violence, because you can't really even read this poster that Senator Durbin referred to, because each one of these little dots is an individual figure representing people who have been killed in this country since December 14th. The 28 people in Newtown aren't even on this chart. And we're talking about 3,300 people who have died as a result of gun violence. And as you'll hear, some of these people died because they were maybe doing something wrong, or in the midst of activity they shouldn't have been part of. But Chuck Walker was 15 years old, and he was just walking on his way to visit his girlfriend to deliver some new shoes that he had bought for her. He was just bringing a gift to his girlfriend, and his family said this is a kid that never, ever got in trouble. He was just going to visit his girlfriend, 15 years old, and he was gunned down on the streets of Hillcrest Heights, Maryland, in an apparent robbery. Just going to visit his girlfriend. Or Mackrell Ross, who was 18 years old, and on September 11th of last year, he was walking to school. He was a member of the track team. He was a member of the ROTC. He was thinking about a career in the military. He was found in his school uniform, still holding his backpack. Just a random act of violence on the way to school. And then Moses Walker, a little bit older, 40 years old, a police officer. He had just finished his shift in August of 2012. He was 4 blocks from his police station, and he was gunned down 1 year away from retirement. He was real active in his community, not only a great police officer, but served as deacon of his church. He was remembered as courteous, polite, and humble. Police officer gunned down 4 blocks from his police station. That's what's happening here, Mr. President. It's the tragedy that brings us here to the floor today, but as we have this debate, we should remember that every day 30 people across this country are dying from guns, and we have the power to do something about it. I'm as pleased as Senator Blumenthal is about the compromise brought to this floor by Senators Manchin and Toomey. It is not perfect, but it is important. It is important because it's going to make our streets safer, and it's going to make sure that less criminals across this country have access to guns. It's a platform for more next week, but it's a really important start. I'll be back to the floor later today and next week to talk about more of these victims. At this time, I'd yield the floor.
Mr. President?
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, would the Senate just yield for unanimous
Yes, sir.
consent, of course? Mr. President, I ask consent that upon the conclusion of the distinguished senator from Utah's comments that I be recognized for my own.
Without objection.
I thank the senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the cooperation and the friendship by the senior senator from Vermont. Mr. President, yesterday on the floor, I discussed an initiative that I have launched this week called Protect 2A, to give voice to the millions of Second Amendment supporters around the United States who are very concerned about Congress enacting any new gun control measures. I'm pleased to announce that we now have over 3,000 responses from citizens all across this country who are sharing their stories, their experiences, and their opinions about why they feel we should do everything in our power to protect their Second Amendment rights. I had only a brief time to share some of those stories yesterday, so I'd like to use a few minutes today to share just a few more. Kathy from the state of Virginia writes, "My husband and I are senior citizens. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army. Over the past several years, we've seen our constitutional rights trampled and twisted until we no longer trust that our government has our well-being as its primary concern. Last year, for the first time in our lives, we bought a gun, not only to ensure our safety against criminals, but to protect and defend our God-given rights as citizens. The most basic right of all mankind, the right to life itself, no longer exists in this country. Protecting our rights, the few the government has left us, is of the utmost importance to us, and we'll do everything necessary to hold on to those rights, regardless of the source of the threats against them. God bless America." Emily from Pennsylvania writes, "I'm 19 years old, and I want to protect myself as soon as I'm legal to. As a young female living in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I don't like walking in the city because I'm afraid of something happening to me. I believe in the power of the Constitution and especially my Second Amendment rights. I'm a strong conservative who believes that the Constitution is our guiding power and not the cronyism that seems to blanket D.C. The Founding Fathers knew what they were doing. As soon as I'm legal, I want to take gun safety classes and purchase a handgun of my very own. I like to think that I can protect my own life, as well as any other person whose life may be in danger. Gun control doesn't solve anything. Criminals will get guns no matter what. I want to be able to protect myself as well as someone else's. Please don't take away my Second Amendment rights." Well said, Emily. William from Connecticut submitted the following statement. "On Tuesday, February 11, 2003, my brother was confronted by 3 armed thugs in a parking lot. Out of their stolen car with a stolen shotgun, they tried to rob him. Much to their surprise, my brother had his legally owned pistol with a legal carry permit. He thwarted this, and he saved his own life and held them at bay until the police arrived. Without this Second Amendment, he wouldn't have been another victim. He would have been another victim to the growing street crime that these bills do not address." You see, Mr. President, these are the rights that we're trying to protect by requiring a 60-vote threshold on any new gun control legislation. And in so doing, we're trying to prevent the ability of members to push through legislation before anyone has had time to read and evaluate the language, and then tell the American people what that language means for them, what that language would mean for their rights. Unfortunately, that is exactly what we are faced with today. Yesterday, Senators Toomey and Manchin announced a new proposal that's widely expected to replace the current language on the background checks in this bill. And yet, as of this morning, as of this very moment, not a single senator has been provided the legislative text of that very provision. Because the background check measure is the centerpiece of this legislation. It's critical that we all know what's in the bill before we vote on it. As I've argued on this floor, and also in the national media and back home in my home state of Utah, we should not be legislating by negotiating closed-door, backroom deals away from the eyes of the American people. We should not be voting before we read and understand exactly how these proposals will affect the rights of law-abiding citizens, and whether we can say with any level of certainty that they will, in fact, reduce crime. This is exactly why we need more debate and why I ask my colleagues to vote no on cloture, so senators and the American people can fully understand the consequences of this legislation. So just to be clear, the vote we will have in just a few minutes will be to end debate on whether the Senate should take up a bill, the very heart of which is being concealed from the Senate and concealed from the American people as of this very moment. Proponents say that the people deserve a vote, but don't they deserve to know what they're voting on? I think they do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I have 8 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and the requests be put in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm about to suggest the absence of quorum for about 1 minute, and I ask consent that upon coming out of the quorum that I be recognized. So I suggest the absent quorum with that request.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent to be able to proceed for 10 minutes.
Without objection. Oh, we are in a quorum call.
Mr. President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I ask consent to be able to continue it for 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, earlier this week, I spoke about the need for the Senate to consider legislation to help increase America's safety by reducing gun violence. I came on the floor of the Senate and I urged my fellow senators to abandon efforts to filibuster proceeding to this bill. The Senate should not have to overcome a filibuster to respond to the call for action in response to the gun violence they're experiencing. Mr. President, I have the privilege of being the longest-serving member of this body, and I've watched debate on so many issues. If there's ever an issue where all 100 of us should vote yes or no, it's here. And I was encouraged by the comments of a number of Senate Republicans that they're prepared to debate these matters and will not support this wrong-headed filibuster. Even the Wall Street Journal editorialized against the filibuster yesterday in a lead editorial entitled "The GOP's Gun Control Misfire." Now, I don't agree with much of that editorial, but I would quote this. If conservatives want to prove their gun control bona fides, the way to do it is debate the merit and vote on the floor. Senators should understand what is in this bill that a small minority of Republicans are seeking to prevent the Senate from even considering. The bill has three parts. None of them threaten Second Amendment rights. None of them call for gun confiscation or a government registry. In fact, two of the three parts have always had bipartisan support. And with regard to the third component, the provisions closing loopholes in our current background check system, Senators Manchin and Toomey yesterday announced they're going to have a bipartisan amendment for this component as well. And yesterday, Senator Collins of Maine, the senior senator from Maine, and I were able to announce another step toward consensus. And we had previously been engaged in discussions with law enforcement and victims groups. More recently, we've been engaged in discussions with the National Rifle Association. We've agreed on modifications to the Stop Illegal Trafficking Firearms Act that addresses all of its substantive concerns while doing, as we've always wanted to do, providing law enforcement officials with the tools they need to investigate and prosecute illegal gun trafficking and straw purchasing. Now, Senator Collins and I are both strong supporters and advocates of Second Amendment rights for law-abiding Americans. And it seems absurd that some senators nonetheless persist in filibustering consideration of our bill. We, the American people, expect us to stand up and face our responsibilities. Whether we like having to vote or not, we have an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, to uphold our laws. And Congress has to confront the serious role the straw purchasing and gun trafficking play in supplying criminals with firearms for illegal purposes. It's not enough to stand on the floor of the Senate and say you're pro-law enforcement. Let us take as a given everybody is pro-law enforcement, but then give law enforcement the tools they need. The bipartisan Stop Illegal Trafficking in Firearms Act will create specific federal criminal statutes prohibiting the trafficking and straw purchasing of firearms. It'll also strengthen other law enforcement tools to assist those investigating these crimes. It's a common sense response to help in the fight against gun violence, and it'll help law enforcement. That's why law enforcement so strongly supports our bill. Yet, some are seeking to filibuster it. Let them go to law enforcement groups and say they're trying to block them and take away the tools they need to keep every one of us safe. Congress should be confronting the serious role that straw purchasing and gun trafficking play in supplying criminals with firearms for illegal purposes, not ducking the issue. Stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. Don't give speeches saying you're in favor of law enforcement, but we're going to take away tools law enforcement needs. Stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. If we can all agree that criminals and those adjudicated as mentally ill should not buy firearms, why should we not try to plug the loopholes in the law that allow them to buy guns without background checks? Stand up and be counted. It's a simple matter of common sense. And if we agree that the background check system is worthwhile, should we not try to inform its content and use so it can be more effective? What responsible gun owner objects to improving the background check system? Stand up and be counted. In our January hearing, I pointed out that Wayne LaPierre of the NRA testified in 1999 in favor of mandatory criminal background checks for, as he put it, every sale at every gun show. He went on to emphasize NRA's support for closing loophole in the background check system by saying, in what has become an oft-quoted remark, no loopholes anywhere for anyone. Well, of course, it's common sense to close the gun show loophole. The Senate voted to do so in 1999. We should vote to do so again. This time we should get it enacted. And that's one of the ways in which the bipartisan proposals from Senators Manchin and Toomey would improve the law if we're able to stop this ill-conceived filibuster and get to the bill. Americans across this great country are looking to us for solutions and for action, not filibustering or sloganeering. Americans are saying, stand up and be counted. I opened our first hearing on these issues in January, asking senators on both sides of the aisle to join in the discussion as part of a collective effort to find solutions to help ensure that no family, no school, no community ever has to endure the kind of tragedy the families of Newtown and Aurora, Mill Creek, Tucson, Blacksburg, or Columbine had to suffer. And as emphasized throughout the committee process, the Second Amendment is secure. It's going to remain secure and protected. That's part of my oath of office as a senator. In two recent cases, the Supreme Court has confirmed that the Second Amendment, like the other aspects of our Bill of Rights, secures a fundamental individual right. Americans have the right to self-defense. They have the right to have guns in their homes to protect their families. No one's going to take away these rights or these guns. Second Amendment rights are the foundation on which our discussion rests. They're not at risk. But what is at risk? We cannot close our eyes to what is at risk. Lives are at risk when responsible people fail to stand up for laws that will keep the guns out of the hands of those who will use them to commit mass murder. So I ask my fellow senators, focus our discussion debate on these proposed statutory measures intended to better protect our children and all Americans. Ours is a free society, an open society, a wonderful society. We should be coming together as elected representatives of all the American people to consider how to become a safer and more secure society. And I would have hoped that all senators in both parties would join together in good faith to strengthen our law enforcement efforts against gun violence and to protect public safety. Let's focus on our responsibilities to the American people. We're the 100 people. There are only 100 senators. We're elected to represent more than 314 million Americans. That is an awesome responsibility. Let's stand up to that responsibility. We're accountable to those people. We're not accountable to special interest groups on either the right or the left. We're accountable to 314 million Americans. These special interest lobbies on either the left or the right should not dictate what we do. We do not need a lobby's permission to pass laws to fight crime and improve public safety. That's our responsibility. And I urge senators to be less concerned with special interest scorecards and more focused on fulfilling our oath to faithfully discharge the duties of our office as United States senators. I consider myself a responsible gun owner. but I'm also someone who cherishes all of our constitutional rights. As a senator who's sworn an oath to uphold those rights, but as a father and a grandfather, as a former prosecutor who has seen the results of gun violence firsthand, I've been working to build consensus around common sense solutions. I'm prepared to debate and vote on the measures before us. I challenge other senators. Do the same. Do the same. Stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. Filibuster says you're not willing to take a stand. You vote maybe. Stand up and be counted. Have the courage. Stand up and be counted. And then let us work together to make America safer. All Americans. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yesterday I had the solemn privilege of meeting with some of the families who lost loved ones in the Sandy Hook shooting. As a father, I can hardly begin to comprehend the enormous grief that these individuals have suffered, losing such a young child or a spouse or a mother in an act of what would appear to be just senseless violence. Burying your child is something that no parent should have to do. The families and friends of the victims at Sandy Hook are owed the dignity and respect of a transparent, good faith effort to address gun violence. I do believe there is a common ground upon which Republicans and Democrats can come together. The issue of mental health of the gun owner is that common ground for me, along with enforcing current laws that are on the books. If there's one thread that connects the horrific series of gun violence episodes in our country, particularly in recent times, it is the mental illness of the shooter. In every case, the perpetrator's mental illness should have been detected. And in some instances, it was detected, but not reported. And these individuals should never be allowed access to a gun. This is actually something we can and should do something about. We need to make sure that the mentally ill are getting the help they need, not guns. As I said, this is something that I believe all of us can agree on. In response to the tragedy at Virginia Tech in 2007, the United States Senate and the Congress unanimously passed a measure to bolster mental health reporting requirements on background checks. Some states, like mine, Texas, have received high marks for their compliance. But many states have essentially been non-compliant, and the Department of Justice has failed to adequately back up implementation of the law. So essentially, the law that we passed in the wake of the Virginia Tech shooting to require reporting of people who are actually adjudicated mentally ill in their respective states is not working the way it should.
Rather than just string along an ineffective program, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to fix it, and we should fix it. I want to say just a word, though, about symbolism versus solutions. I am not interested in Congress voting on a measure that would have no impact on the horrific violence we've seen in recent months. I am not interested in a symbolic gesture which would offer the families of the Sandy Hook shooting no real solutions that they seek. To a person, they told me they're not political. They don't come with an agenda. They're not asking us to pass a specific piece of legislation. They just want to know that their loved one did not die in vain and that something good can come out of this terrible tragedy. So I think dealing with this mental health reporting issue is a common ground we could come together on. But we also need to make sure that we're not just going to pass additional laws that will not be enforced. What possible solace could that be to these families for Congress just to pass additional laws that will never be enforced? Take, for example, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS system as it's called, which flags people who lie on their background check. The annual number of cases referred for prosecution fell sharply during the first 2 years of the current president's term of office. Indeed, there was a 58% drop in referrals and a 70% drop in prosecutions for people who lie on the background check. We can fix this. We can fix this. Let's make sure that guns aren't getting into the hands of people who we all agree should not have them. We could be doing this right now with broad bipartisan support. But let me just conclude with a couple of observations about where we find ourselves with an 11 o'clock vote on an underlying bill which remains controversial and which I think the majority leader and all of us know has very little chance, if any, of going anywhere. We heard yesterday that our colleagues from West Virginia and Ohio have come together on a bipartisan background check bill. I asked my staff as recently as on my way over here whether that had actually been released, the language, so we can actually read it and find out what's in it, and it has not. We have no commitment in front of the Senate by the majority leader that there will be a robust debate and amendment process, because there are a lot of amendments that need to be offered to whatever that so far unwritten bill says, I'm sure, and we need to have a full, robust, transparent discussion of this issue in front of the American people. So I'm not going to vote to proceed to a bill that has not yet been written, no matter how well-intentioned it may be. We need to make sure that what we do is address the cause of this violence and to come up not with symbolic gestures that will have no impact or to pass other laws that will not be enforced, but to come together with real solutions. Rather than put on a show and pat ourselves on the back and call it a day, let's do something good to make sure we've done everything in our human capacity to prevent another Sandy Hook. This is what these families want. This is what they deserve. And this is what the American people deserve. Now, this calls the United States Senate to exercise its historic and essential role in bringing all sides together to try to come up with solutions. But if we can't do that here, if we can't do that now, when will we ever address this tragedy. The President has told some of these victims' families that this side of the aisle doesn't really care about their loss. That's not true. It's false. The President is wrong. All of us care about these families, and all of us should care about violence in our communities, and we should try to work together to find ways to address this, not in a symbolic sort of way, but in a real way that offers a solution and maybe just a little bit of progress on this issue that would allow these families to say, no, my loved one did not die in vain. Something good came out of this. We want to work together to find real solutions to this type of senseless, incomprehensible violence that's taken too many lives. And I hope we will. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I'd suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 32, S649, a bill to ensure that all individuals who should be prohibited from buying a firearm are listed in the National Instant Criminal Background Check for every firearm sale and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to S649, a bill to ensure that all individuals who should be prohibited from buying a firearm are listed in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System and require a background check for every firearm sale and for other purposes shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Cowan, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Donnelly, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Flake, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Heitkamp. Mr. Heller. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kane. Mr. King. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Wall. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Ayotte, Bennett, Blumenthal, Cantwell, Cardin, Chambliss, Coburn, Collins, Coons, Cowan, Donnelly, Flake, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Heinrich, Hirono, Isaacson, Kane, Leahy, Levin, Manchin, McCain, Menendez, Murphy, Murray, Reed of Rhode Island, Sanders, Schatz, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Warner, Wyden. Senators voting in the negative: Blunt, Cornyn, Crapo, Johans. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Vitter, no. Ms. Heitkamp, aye. Mr. Grassley, no. Mrs. Boxer, aye. Mr. Hatch, no. Mr. Pryor, no. Mr. Paul, no. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. King, aye. Mr. Burr, aye. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Rubio, no. Mrs. Fisher, no. Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Brown, aye. Mr. Begich, no. Ms. Warren, aye. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Roberts, no. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Nelson, aye. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Alexander, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Portman, no. Mr. Cochran, no. Mr. Inhofe, no. Ms. Murkowski, no. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Coates, no. Mr. Sessions, no. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Moran, no. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Heller, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye.
Are there any senators wishing to vote or change their votes? On this vote, the yeas are 68, the nays are 31. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I appreciate everyone's cooperation. I'm glad we were able to get cloture on this legislation. This legislation and this vote that just took place is, of course, important for our country, especially the people from Connecticut who have lived through this tragedy. But it's also important for this body, the Senate. There have been many things written in the last several months about how the Senate cannot operate. And I so appreciate the members on the other side of the aisle, especially John McCain, on a Sunday show said, I don't think there should be a filibuster on this. John McCain is has been a leader in this country for 31 years. People respect his opinion, and I'm grateful to all Republicans who joined with us to allow this debate to go forward. Now, the hard work starts now. As everyone knows, because we've all heard this on a number of occasions, the First Amendment is going to be one that has been worked on for weeks by Senator Manchin, Senator Toomey, and Senator Kirk. That will be the First Amendment. We expect to lay that down a later day. I hope that there will be no efforts to continue this filibuster with the 30 hours. There's no reason we shouldn't get to legislating. So we have an important lunch, as everyone knows, and we're going to finish that lunch. I hope we can come back and lay down this amendment and start some debate on it. I've indicated to Senators Toomey and Manchin, they want to spend a lot of time because they have to get prepared for what they're going to do beginning Tuesday morning, and I said that's fine. In the meantime, there are other things that we can do on this legislation. We know there are other amendments, and I hope that no one is going to say, well, I'm going to filibuster every amendment that's offered. That defeats the whole purpose of why we're here. We can't allow that to happen. It would be just such a shame if that, in fact, did happen. We're going to have an open amendment process, meaning senators are going to be able to offer amendments. Now, one thing we can't do is have pending scores of amendments. We're not going to do that. We need to make this debate so people understand what's going on. There are certain things that we're going to have vote on here. We're going to have to vote on the Manchin-Toomey amendment. We're going to have a vote on assault weapons. Some people love it. Some people hate it. But we're going to have a vote on that. We're also going to have a vote on the size of clips or magazines. But, Mr. President, that's the only votes that I am going to make sure that we have. Other than that, we should have amendments. People think the present law is too weak, change that. If people think it's too strong, have some amendments to change that. We cannot have just a few senators spoiling everything for everyone here. This is the time we should lay down amendments and see if we can pass them. And we can set up procedures here as we've done to make sure that everyone is heard. I can remember, Mr. President, when I had to meet with the families from Newtown. To be very honest with you, I didn't want to. But I did. Met in my room over here at 219. That was a hard meeting because everyone knows how I've approached things in the past in regard to these matters now before us. But I'm like, I think, everyone in America. Mr. President, can we have order? I'm like virtually everyone in America. The events of the last few months has been very tragic. People going to a movie theater to watch a movie and they're gunned down. And more would have been gunned down, but for the fact that the man's 100-clip magazine jammed. Newtown. We've all seen the pictures. They're not here today. But those babies being shot more than once. So, Mr. President, America has a different view of this violence than they did just a little while ago. we all believe in the Constitution. We all know what all these amendments are about and what they're supposed to do, and we're going to make sure that during this debate we keep the Constitution in mind. But the families of the most recent tragedy in Newtown deserve a debate, because these people from Newtown, who are the survivors of this tragedy, are representing everybody in America. That's why that's why we need this debate. And the Senate's going to give these family members, friends, and people who live in Newtown, no matter how long it takes, the ability to see how people stand on these issues. So the Senate's going to give them votes. We hope it'll be sooner rather than later, but we're going to work through this. Senators on both sides have amendments that they want to offer, and we'll be we have our most experienced senator, who's been here longer than anyone else, is the manager of this bill, Senator Leahy from Vermont. And he's always a fair man. He's going to continue to be. He knows that there are a few amendments that have to go forward, but after that, we're going to be as deliberative as we can to make sure that people have the opportunity to offer amendments. After we get through the Manchin-Toomey amendment, the assault weapons, and the high-capacity magazines, we're going to make sure that everyone has the opportunity and the Republicans catch up. We can have the First Amendment, the Toomey-Manchin amendment. I don't know if it's a Democratic amendment or Republican amendment, but that's the first one we're going to do. So after we get through these two things, we'll just have the Republicans will be, looks like at that time, 2 or 3 behind. They can catch up with us, and then we'll alternate back and forth. Even though there's no rule requiring that, that's probably the best way to move forward. So, Mr. President, I'm grateful to everyone that we're here and able to start legislating on this issue that has caught the attention of the American people and, frankly, the world. Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent. We're having a joint caucus. I ask consent the Senate recess from 12:30 until 2:30 today to allow for a joint caucus meeting, and that all time during recess and morning business count post-cloture on the motion to proceed S-649.
Without objection. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.